Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. No, it's not Charlie Sykes. It's Mona Charen sitting in for the great Charlie Sykes, who is on vacation. We are very fortunate to have as our guest this morning A.B. Stoddard, who is one of the smartest analysts of politics writing in America today. A.B., great to have you.
It's wonderful to be with you, Mona.
In honor of Charlie's tradition here at the Bulwark podcast, I think before we get into the fantastic articles that you've written recently, we do have to touch base with the crazy that's out there. And there was something called America Fest that was held over the last few days out in Arizona. And this was the Turning Point USA group that was founded by a kid who got some big donor behind to give him lots of money. And this Trump acolyte child has got himself at the head of this organization called Turning Point USA. They had a big meeting that they called the America Fest. And guess who the big star was? The person that they were lionizing as a hero for our time. It was Kyle Rittenhouse. Okay. So, and as if that weren't bad enough. And, again, you have to say, Kyle Rittenhouse was a confused and misled 17-year-old who had no business being out with a gun at a riot. But the point is not about him. The point is what is being done with him by the right at this point, that they are making him into a hero. He killed two people. Whether you think he should have been criminally responsible for that under very murky circumstances in which, I think that the jury's verdict was probably right, that he didn't murder them. He was firing in self-defense. But boy, what a horrible situation. And nobody, any civilized person should be saying, what a tragedy. 2 lives have been lost. This should never have happened if the kid had not been out there hauling a long gun around in a riot. Anyway, that's not where the right is it, AB? I mean, they are all about saying, yeah, he's great. He is a model for other young men to follow.
That's exactly right. He had a mom who drove him there. He owned these assault weapons. He is a nice white boy with a sweet smile and a baby face, and he's a vigilante. I mean, essentially, what the right is trying to message these days is that if you think the way we do, you have to take matters into your own hands. So instead of, as you point out, saying that the police on the scene at this riot should have said, young man, it's time for you to go home. I don't know what relative drove you here and why you own that weapon, but it's really a terrible situation here. It's very volatile and it's time for you to leave. They didn't do that. And as you know, many of these laws are weak. The definition of self-defense is broad. He was allowed to have that weapon carried into Wisconsin, whatever. It's fine. But the reception of the verdict and the message going forward should be that this is dangerous, it's irresponsible, and we just can't have kids, misguided children doing what they want, let alone misguided adults. And it's all of a piece with the abortion ban in Texas, which empowers citizens to take matters into their own hands as well, to try to track down people who have aided a woman getting an abortion, and looking for, prize money, essentially. I mean, this is really an incredible escalation in the message about not only that a few years ago it was still the other side's wrong and they're crazy, then it was the other side's dangerous. Now it's that we have to take any measure that we choose to stop them. And that's the promotion of violent rhetoric, the actual promotion of violence, and this vigilante messaging to citizens that they have the right not only to protest violently, but to just litigate matters as they see fit. And it's just incredible how quick it's taken off. It's empowered by so many people up and down the ballot,
including members of
it's
Congress.
Never. I would also point out, most potently, it is never criticized by the leadership of the party. So that's how it rises, and that's what's so frightening, is that no one's going to stand in the way to stop it, even if they think it's wrong.
That's Absolutely right. And among the people who are encouraging this are sitting members of the House of Representatives. Madison Cawthorn, Lauren Boebert. They are saying they'd love to hire the guy. I mean, this is so far beyond what civilized people do in a well-functioning society. As you say, it is truly, truly frightening. All right, but as if that weren't bad enough, there was another speech delivered at this America Fest. And the fact that they try to hijack America and American and the flag and all of that for their perverted ends is
Oh,
another.
Mona, they're always the real Americans. We're not.
Yeah, exactly. So here was a speech by Jesse Waters. He's a Fox host, I guess, and he talked about Fauci. And let's listen to what he recommended to this mostly college-aged audience about how they should treat the leading public health authority in America today.
Now you're going for the kill shot. The kill shot with an ambush, deadly, because he doesn't see it coming. This is when you say, Dr. Fauci, you funded risky research at a sloppy Chinese lab, the same lab that sprung this pandemic on the world. You know why people don't trust you, don't you? Boom! He is dead. He is dead. He's done. Now, how you do that? 30 seconds. That's all you need. 30 seconds. Now, you get that footage to us. You get it to Fox. You get it to Human Events. You get it to Breitbart. You get it to Daily Caller. You get it to the Turning Point pipeline. Imagine Tucker Carlson teases out of the A block. Coming up. Brave college student confronts Lord Fauci at dinner. Exclusive footage. Right back.
Yeah.
Get us that. That's what we want.
Brave.
That changes the whole conversation of the country. I've authorized it. Just make sure it's legal.
Yeah. Now, he was not actually saying that they should take AK-47s and aim kill shots at Fauci, but it's certainly that he was saying they should confront him and videotape it, and that's the so-called kill shot. But to use that language and its ambiguity, knowing full well that a lot of people in that audience are would-be Kyle Rittenhouses, it is just staggering, AB, that
I,
this is what the right wing entertains itself with now.
I actually think that it's not ambiguous. He uses done, dead, 30 seconds, kill shot. It's ambush. He doesn't see it coming. It's actually calling for the assassination of Dr. Fauci. He just closes it at the end so he doesn't lose his job at Fox by saying, make sure it's legal.
Yeah.
And trying to pretend that you might threaten him in a confrontation and get footage and send that to Fox. But really, most of what he's saying is he should be assassinated. That's what I want. And it's so incredibly chilling because it's not, to me, it's not ambiguous. And he will not be punished by Fox. And it again, this is not holding up the McCloskeys of St. Louis on their property with their guns in front of protesters protecting their own house. You can argue with what they did, but this is buy a gun, leave your home, hunt a human being down, a public official, and you will be glamorized, and this is romanticized, and you'll be rewarded for some kind of violent act with a weapon. That's what this is. This is not. We ought to rally around people who protect their homes, who come out in their polo shirts or their Brooks Brothers shirts from their mansion and point guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. That's not what we're talking about here. This is 200 times more dangerous. This is not glorifying people using their Second Amendment rights to defend their property. This is, this is a call to arms and pointing out specific people that need to be ambushed with a kill shot and then, quote, they're dead. Couldn't be more clear.
Have we heard one peep out of Mitch McConnell denouncing this, or Kevin McCarthy, or any of the so-called leaders of the Republican Party who are supposed to be the gatekeepers and who are supposed to be the sane ones. We keep hearing that there is a sane caucus
Right.
in the Senate. Where are they?
But that's what's so interesting, Mona, is that sometimes there you could tell during the Trump years, you'd have someone kind of take the heat and be sort of the wingman pusher backer. No John Cornyn, no John Thune, no John Barrasso, no Mitch McConnell, no Rob Portman, who's retiring, no Richard Burr, who's retiring, no Roy Blunt, who's retiring, no Steve Scalise, no Kevin McCarthy, no Elise Stefanik, no Tom Emmers running the campaign committee that's trying to hold on to swing seats represented by moderate Republicans who voted for impeachment that Trump's trying to take down. There's no one stepping up. You can understand why the top guys don't want to be in the crosshairs and they're hiding somewhere, but they don't even send out some kind of lieutenant at a lower rung to go on TV and get that question and say this is really out of control. Nobody.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to the fantastic piece that you wrote for the Bulwark. And you said that the attempted coup in 2021 really ought to be the Democrats' leading message. And you said, for most of 2021, the Democratic Party in Washington has earnestly tended to deck chair displays as the ship of democracy sinks. So, AB, a lot of people would read your piece, a lot of Democrats, and they would say, look, it does no good to bang on about Trump. Look what happened in the state of Virginia. You want people to go out and denounce Trump, and the voters don't care, and it'll just distract from the kitchen table issues that voters really care about. And why are you giving us this advice?
Exactly. These sentiments have driven them into a polling plummet. And at the end of their first year in power of the Senate, House, and White House, and at the peak of wipeout losses next year in the midterm elections. And I'm not asking them to stop talking about the economy and jobs and the pandemic. I actually think that everything that they're facing in terms of these headwinds on all these issues really leads back to the pandemic, that no matter how many green shoots they find in the economy and positive indicators are now, are that are real. You talk about lowest unemployment in more than 50 years, all this other stuff. This kind of thing will not penetrate until people feel that the pandemic is under control, because they can't see any hope in the economy. They just see more pandemic, and then less growth, and more inflation. So while they're fighting that, it's not that they stop talking about that, but knowing that that is out of their control for the time being, and that the greatest threat we face is actually the end of the constitutional order in just a few years, it behooves them to talk about the findings of the January 6th committee. So that doesn't mean necessarily that you talk about the riot, that you talk about the fact that the Republicans don't support the Capitol Police when there's a coup underway, and Donald Trump and Donald Trump. No, you talk about what we are learning about how fragile our system is and how premeditated this was. That it started in November. It was in deep development throughout December. It involved many, many people across the government, in the executive branch and in the legislative branch, that there is exposure for members of Congress seeking to undermine the process of their own chamber, of their own institution, to rob the voters of their say, and to actually not decertify an election, but steal an election. And that this has ramifications for the years to come. And if this was the kind of thing that Biden spoke about on a regular basis, what we're learning from the 1-6 committee, if the leaders went on TV now and then and talked about that, as they continue talking about the struggles that Americans are focused on every day, and less about the negotiations over the Build Back Better, which people interpret as some pie in the sky intra-party fight that's a waste of their time and energy to even read about. I do think that what you would do is you would, potentially give us a path to mitigating their victories next year, and their hold on the power levers that allow them to nullify the 2024 election. And you do that by bringing back the 2018 voters and the 2020 voters who might be Republicans or independents who really actually are concerned. And I don't think this is the woke left. I don't think this is the young activists in the party. I think this is the right edge of the Democratic coalition that actually is concerned about this stuff and will pay attention to what we're learning from the January 6th committee. And it needs to be highlighted and it needs to be front and center as a threat to the system. You don't have to talk, you don't have to use Trump's name a lot. You have to educate the public about the perilous state that we're in.
You just said something that is intriguing, and I wonder if we could just drill down on that for a second. You mentioned in passing that the January 6th committee may be discovering that members of Congress were involved in this attempted coup. Have you been hearing that? Is that what the scuttlebutt is?
We absolutely know that Jim Banks and Jim Jordan and Paul Gosar and Mo Brooks and a few others, Andy Biggs and Scott Perry, there's a good half a dozen of them at least, that were involved in different levels, either talking to Ali Alexander of the Stop the Steal movement, who was planning the rally and was whooping people up, what part of the army of social media influencers whooping people up about false claims about the election and how January 6th was the last stand, come to Washington, protect the president, blah, blah, all that stuff. So they're in connection with these people, but some of them are also working with Jeffrey Clark at the Department of Justice in an effort to decertify, to stall for time, to explore these false claims of election fraud. So we know that. Now, we don't know yet. I don't have texts to read to you, but we absolutely know, that Jim Jordan was talking to Mark Meadows about this. We know the 6 names I mentioned, that they were involved different levels on the spectrum, from top level DOJ conversations about how to help Trump all the way out to the social media landscape where they were working to rile up the nutters and bring people to Washington on January 6th with false promises. So you look at Gosar trying to sue Pence, and then his suit was thrown out in late December because he insisted that Pence take over, that he was empowered by the Constitution to take over the entire process on January 6th, which of course he was not. This prompted Pence to have to come out earlier than he wanted to, in sort of further away from January 6th than he wanted to say, I don't believe I have that power. His allies are still upset about that. And they believe that Trump might have been involved with that Gosar lawsuit, knowledgeable about it and eager about the plans that he and Sidney Powell were cooking up. So it's definitely, there's enough stink in Congress to there might be others, we don't know, but there are definitely players and sort of, I don't know how loosely I can use the term, sort of co-conspirators in lying to people, trying to mess up the certification of electors in these different states, trying to promote fraud, and then encouraging them to come to town on that day to protect the presidency, knowing full well that they were all going to bring their guns and that there was intelligence concern about January 6th, as we all discussed at the time.
We did. I mean, I can remember at the time when they were, putting out this all points bulletin call for, patriots to come to the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, I was tweeting, for what that's worth, whatever, but I was saying, what the hell for? What are they coming here for? There's absolutely no legitimate reason to call a mob to the Capitol. I of course didn't know, didn't foresee exactly what was going to happen, but I could see that it was no good reason to have them here. The other thing is, and it's such a witch's brew, AB. I mean, honestly, the fact that these nutters, as you put it, and sinister, lying, amateurs are leaders of our country is just one of those things that gives you a little bit of vertigo. But that is where it is. I mean, Sidney Powell, who's almost certifiably addled, was in the White House, in the Oval Office, giving advice to the president. General Flynn was recommending martial law and that we should, confiscate all the voting machines in the country. I mean, it's just beyond belief. Okay, but the other couple things are that Donald Trump was calling people on the Hill while the riot was in progress. Right? We know this. I mean, Jim Jordan did not deny that he spoke to Trump that day. And we know that he reached Mike Lee, attempting to reach Tuberville, and Lee has already acknowledged, was reported in early January, that he did get this phone call from Trump and that Trump was attempting to delay the vote to certify the election while the riot was going on. So that is damning, is it not? I mean,
Oh, I still cannot believe now. Mike Lee got a voicemail also from Giuliani, so he heard from both of them asking for the
that's
same
right. That's
thing.
right. Yeah.
And I think he got a voicemail from Giuliani, but he got the call from Trump, and Tuberville had left the chamber or something.
Yeah, because they were running for their lives.
Right. And then Rudy Giuliani was hoping that night they could still that Mike Lee could help the band of decertifiers who, after all of the mayhem and death, still went on to vote to decertify on the House side. So it's amazing to me that Mike Lee and he was asked, that he was asked to look into things in December. He admits he researched it and then told them, I don't see the fraud that you think you see. This is the point, is that this was, if you, there is no evidence that Justice Alito was going to do what Sidney Powell was asking him to do, but she wanted to delay the certification on January 6th because she thought that Alito, who has jurisdiction over Texas, was going to weigh in on her effort to do something. I mean,
It's crazy
it's
town.
so crazy
Yeah.
that it's hard for us to talk about it without laughing. But people of former integrity, as high up as Mike Lee on the food chain, did not come to us, did not say that this was going on, was complicit enough to be getting phone calls from the war room from mad dogs like Rudy Giuliani in the heat of the riot. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's just so surreal to me. I mean, Mike Lee is not Mo Brooks or Paul Gosar, but there's so many of them, and Lindsey Graham, and it's there are just so many people that absolutely knew what they were up to. His own campaign knew within days, and by the end of November, that these claims weren't true. They basically turned their operation into a stop the steal fundraising mechanism. It went on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, absolutely knowing that they were stealing money from these vulnerable people that they were, quote, raising it from.
Yeah.
It's really hard to take in
Yeah.
how cynical it is and how crazy it is and how dangerous it is. But it's important. That's part of the message that has to get through from the January 6th committee. It has to be messaged repeatedly and clearly that this was a government-wide conspiracy from the White House to the DOJ to the halls of Congress that we think Justice Alito was not involved in. But that's a pretty broad conspiracy to throw the legitimacy of Joe Biden's win into doubt if you're the most innocent of them, all the way to the guilty who were absolutely willing to steal the election.
That's it. It is a comprehensive failure of the elites. That is, the elites of the Republican Party, who had a duty, a patriotic duty, to put a stop to this, to say this is a line you cannot cross, to say the sorts of things that Lindsey Graham, frankly, and was saying right after January 6th, and others, and Kevin McCarthy was saying right afterwards. This is it. I'm out. This is too far. But of course, they've all crawled back. And you had a recent piece about Mitch McConnell, in which you pointed out that he puts one toe into the water where he says, oh, yes, Trump was responsible for it, but then he doesn't vote to convict. And he's always sort of playing both sides. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I find it so interesting because I know people he talked to have described to me his thinking about how he would vote to acquit, but then come out and lacerate Trump with that famous statement where he said he was morally and practically, and then some other adverb, responsible for inciting the insurrection, which was really obviously incongruous with not voting to convict him and voting to
Right.
acquit him. But he did it because he wants to have it both ways. Um, and then, he went quiet for a few months. He didn't want to endorse Herschel Walker in Georgia, which is really ground zero for the Republican, what's left of this. I don't call it a civil war anymore. It's sort of the Republican, implosion, right? It's like they're going to risk losing Georgia because Donald Trump wants to destroy Brian Kemp, the sitting governor, so badly that and control the Republican Party primary process there, that he has to have his pick in Herschel Walker, who is someone that only, his only viability as a candidate is that he's famous and he loves Donald Trump, but he has otherwise no business, running for the Senate. And so McConnell thought that would be, he has a troubled past and some controversy. So he thought that Donald Trump, that Herschel Walker would be a mistake. So they were early on, the establishment, pushing back against Herschel Walker, and then all of a sudden he endorses Herschel Walker. So he's going to, on the one hand, endorse and protect incumbent Senator Lisa Murkowski, who is obviously an object of Trump's wrath, who Trump is trying to defeat. But then on the other hand, he's going to go with Trump's pick in in uh, in Georgia, and he certainly doesn't want Ted Budd, Trump's pick in North Carolina. All want McCrory, but they're going to try to stay quiet. And there's just another example in Alabama. So he said on Fox, because he probably still wants to be invited on Fox, that he would support Donald Trump if Donald Trump was the nominee in 2024.
Yep.
And he voted against a January 6th commission, a 9/11 style bipartisan, the sort of fulsome effort that really would have been the best resolution for this, and to put
Hmm.
out a report for history, et cetera. And then, he buckles on other areas. And then recently he's just popped out of the ground again and decided to like cheer on the January 6th committee and
Yeah.
poke MAGA in the eye, which is so interesting. What you see is that Team McConnell is making sure the media writes these stories saying, "Oh, he's totally vanquished Trump in the effort to unseat him as leader. It's a joke. No one, even crazy Ron Johnson, Tuberville, no one will back an effort to dump McConnell as leader," as Trump is like press releasing about now once every 10 days.
Hmm.
And so this is supposed to make people think like, oh, this is great. Like McConnell's like liberated and found his space. Well, no, because Trump is not going to let go. He's a rabid dog with a bone. He's not going to like change his mind about Mitch McConnell. And once you encourage insurgents, like the few candidates who say, yes, we're going to vote against McConnell, and it becomes a fundraising message, this emboldens people on the House side, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, to challenge McCarthy as leader, and has a whole ripple effect throughout the entire party. And I'm not rooting for them to win. What I'm saying is,
Right.
and I'm not saying McCarthy's been a good leader. I'm just looking at just breaking down the mechanics of this. Any threat to McCarthy is also a destabilizing force in the party, right? It's like you embolden Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Greene to take on McCarthy and say he's not fit to be leader. And and Steve Bannon's on his podcast calling McConnell a wimp and saying he's betrayed the Republican Party. If they're to rise to power again, and the message at the base is McConnell and McCarthy have to go, they don't know where that ends.
You know, this ceaseless incitement of the very worst aspects of their base is the sort of thing that you see all the time in dysfunctional countries. You see it in the Arab world to a large degree. And a lot of the corrupt leaders in the Arab world are constantly feeding awful propaganda and incitement to their people to just keep them angry at somebody else so that they won't turn their anger about
Yeah.
the conditions in the country toward them. It's something that Putin does very skillfully. It's not something you associate with the United States, but it's very, isn't it interesting, AB, that we're at this moment now where the inciters have also just lost control of what they can direct the mob to think or believe. So, for example, the other day when Trump encouraged the audience to get booster shots, they booed him.
I know.
Yeah. So, that's it's not something that, the monster once unleashed can't really necessarily be controlled even by the ringleader. Um, But back to McConnell for just a second. I just want to underline this. I mean, so it would be worth rereading that speech that he gave after he voted to acquit Trump in the second impeachment, where he just lambasted him and said that he was completely and totally responsible. He even dangled the idea that he might be legally liable for what
Yes.
happened that day, and that it was a disgrace, and that it was, one of the low points in American history. And he went on and on. And then a few months later, he says, yeah, but I would vote for him for president again.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, it's just, how can anybody take the man seriously? All right.
Well,
Now, I want,
the good news is about for McConnell is that he doesn't care, right? He just he has no concern with being consistent. He wants to be majority leader, but now he wants to feel in some way that in this chapter he's technically done with Trump. I also recommend for those who might look back at this the speech after the Senate trial. I would recommend the speech on the morning of January 6th. Mitch McConnell had just lost the majority in
mhm,
Georgia the night
mhm,
before,
mhm,
with the two runoff seats going to Democrats because Trump depressed the vote there. And he gave
correct.
a speech about the certification of electors, in which he basically also said, like, Trump had lied to people, and that this is, you can't do this. Congress doesn't have the power to steal an election. I mean, he didn't use those words exactly, but it was also a very interesting speech. And so once in a while, he fancies himself an institutionalist, and right now he really is trying to have it both ways. I think he's very eager for the January 6th committee to reveal terrible things about Donald Trump and Mark Meadows and the members of Congress who helped them.
Let's take a minute. I'd be curious to hear your analysis of what's been happening with the Democrats, because they are, of course, at the moment in the midst of this, I guess you could call it meltdown regarding Manchin and so on. And a lot of us at the Bulwark, well, we have a little bit of a mixed view at the Bulwark. So JVL thinks that Manchin behaved very badly, and that may be right. But Tim Miller and I think that the Democrats have been completely unrealistic about what could be expected. Oh, and Sarah too, what could be expected from Manchin. That they're lucky to have Manchin in the Senate from West Virginia, which, as I said in my recent column, you know, West Virginia gave more votes to Donald Trump than Utah or Texas or Alabama. I mean, it is a super red state. And the fact that they have Manchin there at all means that they can't afford to alienate him. And just this morning, AB, before we started this podcast, I was reading the paper about how the Republicans who've always kind of courted him, but now they're really, kicking it up into high gear, saying, hey, looks like your people don't like you. You're welcome here.
I've covered a lot of party switching, and it's very possible, if you listen to how frustrated Joe Manchin is and how he speaks about the Democrats. He calls them they. It's very interesting. He also never says I'm a Democrat because before he talks about their disagreements.
Mm-hmm.
He never tries to say I'm a Democrat because they would be in the majority if he joins them.
Right.
And so they're probably offering him, Lord knows.
He could write his ticket.
I have been on team math the entire time.
Mm.
The math is the math is the math is the math. And
Right.
the idea that the Democrats, woke up after this election and, oh, bummer, had lost a bunch of their frontliners in the House. Republicans had won 13 seats when they were supposed to be beaten into the ground by Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. Do you remember the days, Mona, when the Democrats last fall were spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars because they had between 8 and 10 Senate seats in play? They were going to win red states like Montana and
Oh,
Kansas, South
yes.
Carolina and
They were even
Kentucky.
talking about making a pass at Texas.
Yes. So if you look back at this, they were gravely disappointed. I mean, the results were gravely disappointing. No matter that Biden won by fewer than 45,000 votes in a couple of states, and instead they turn
Though, of
right
course,
around
his
and
popular
pretend.
victory was much larger. But
But
yes,
again,
yes.
I mean,
In the Electoral College.
unfortunately, in our system, a lot of votes in California and New York really don't matter. And so saying that Biden won by 81 million votes, is more than anyone ever got, is really great, but not when he almost elected Donald Trump to a second term by only 44,000 votes and change in a few swing states in the Electoral College. So I'll say this again in our conversation, that the Democrats were handed 2 Senate seats in the runoff elections on January 5 in Georgia by Donald Trump, who depressed the rural vote there by saying the system was rigged. I think Biden did not expect to get those seats. And I think that they very much complicated his governing path after that. The Democrats had promised their voters the moon, and then they continued to act as if they had a mandate and a margin, and they have neither. And they have overpromised and underdelivered. And so you're going to have a disappointed base sitting out the next election and going back to their lives and not engaging in the threat to democracy, let alone the outcome of the Build Back Better negotiations. And that's, to me, has been the problem all along.
And you have this disproportionate enthusiasm. So the people who think democracy is in danger are the Republicans. Wrongly. I mean, they believe that democracy is in danger because the last election by their lights was stolen, and they are energized to get out and vote the next time around to redeem what they regard as a great wrong. And the people and the Democrats aren't as concerned about the threats to democracy, which was one of the points of your excellent piece.
Yeah, and I think that that's the fault of the Democrats because, first of all, in the winter, when we saw this incredibly shrewd and strategic and coordinated national effort to kick into gear and pass all of these partisan voting restriction bills in all the right places in swing states in order to increase partisan influence over the outcomes, to enable state legislatures, and they're all Republican, to basically pick and choose which votes they wanted to count. You saw Democrats just bullheadedly continue to talk about voter suppression. They won't even let us give water bottles in
I know.
line. And it was never about vote counting. It was all
Right.
about vote casting. And
Yep.
so they spend months doing that, and boycotting the MLB and this and that. They spend months on that, and then since then, now that they've swallowed it's actually a problem of voter nullification, electoral nullification, they've just sort of gone mute on it. They just realized that that wasn't the problem. But again, not educating the public about what this is, and how this is literally now, as it's legal now. It's been legalized to steal the election. And so you and I guess Stacey Abrams will talk about this in her campaign, but that's not enough. It needs to be at the federal, national level. It needs to be in clear, repeated language, over and over again. And then I just want to read this because when you talk about Republicans believing not only Trump's lies, but then all of the lieutenants that have helped him and have been lying since, Bannon's podcast, which I'm God bless if Tim wants to spend his days watching this. I don't know that I'll sleep, so I can't watch Bannon's podcast
I know.
for a month and then do a Bulwark piece on it because it'll really send me to the hospital.
I hear
But
ya.
I'm sure you saw that he has said in the past that we're taking over the elections, that he
Yep.
said this week, they want to talk about all day long about Omicron and January 6th, and we love it because nobody cares. We care because we care about the legitimacy of our process. We are a constitutional republic. And guess what? We are going to take over the election apparatus. And then he encouraged, quote, American citizens to aid him in the takeover. And then says, to encourage them. I understand you don't think that's democracy because the globalists have done the misdirection plays and having everyone look the other way. So he's trying to say, you felt that you weren't empowered in the past, but basically, come on, vigilantes, let's take back democracy. And the messaging from these very powerful perches are, yes, that we are a constitutional republic, Mona, and we're actually interested in and devoted in the legitimacy of our system.
Yeah, they believe they are the patriots, and unless the true patriots wake up and push back, we are in serious serious trouble as a country. Let me just also hit one more theme because I do it relentlessly. I'm constantly beating this drum, but it's important. You mentioned the Electoral Count Act, and people should understand that the Electoral Count Act was passed after the awful mess of an election we had in 1876, and it is a piece of legislation that is so poorly drafted, so murky that it's pretty unclear what it demands in terms of vote counting. And one of the things that it permits is that if just one member of the House and one member of the Senate raise an objection next January 6th, of an election year, about the certification of any state's delegation, that is sufficient to call that into question. And then they have to go to a special committee and so on. That is nuts, and that needs to be changed. That's just one thing. There are other things in the bill that are incredibly easily abused, and the Republicans are, they've got neon signs saying we are looking to abuse the law and steal the next election.
Yes.
And so the Democrats, when you talk to them, I'm sorry, but when I've talked to Democrats, they say, and I say, what about that? Just make that a standalone reform of the Electoral Count Act so that it makes it impossible to steal the election easily. And they say, well, Republicans won't vote for it. Well, fine, then make them own it if they won't vote for it, and explain what the stakes are. That if Republicans are defending that piece of legislation, they want it to be easy to steal the next election. And they say, well, yeah, we're aware of that, but it's part of a larger track of voter rights, and those issues are all bound up together and they're not separate. And I kind of despair, like they don't see the urgency of that particular reform.
I agree with you. And I was despairing many, many, many months ago because I felt that Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney were not alarmed at the voting restriction bills that were being passed by the states, and the enabling of voter nullification, and therefore the prospect for more violence on January 6th of 2025, um, by either side.
Hmm.
What I do think is a green shoot, a ray of hope, is that they are discovering through their investigation how murky the situation is, how vulnerable we are, and how much the ECA needs to be reformed. I do know that Manchin is trying to talk to Republicans these days about, he says he's in conversations with them about rules changes. I do think since he rescued the party from their ill-fated For the People Act, and he wrote with Klobuchar the Freedom to Vote Act with voter ID, and it's a more moderate, realistic bill, and actually addresses this danger of partisan influence in the count. I think and I hope that he is talking to them about the ECA, or he would come around to at least some kind of, maybe a carve out just for the ECA. Like you said, put them on the record. If we can't get 10 of you to just reform the Electoral Count Act, then we need to know for the record that you're pro coup. But
Right.
come on, Mitt Romney, stand up and be counted.
Yep.
And so that is my one actual glimmer of optimism, is that with the revelations from the investigation into January 6th and the committee, doing such a thorough job, and the Republicans on that committee, their concern about the Electoral Count Act, that might, no matter what happy talk the Democrats continue to sing about the need for a kitchen sink, another kitchen sink, of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act and the ECA reform, that they will see the wisdom if some Republicans and Manchin can convince their colleagues to do this on the way out the door. Get the retiring members, someone like Bill Cassidy. I know who the sane Republicans are. Mike Rounds is one. Todd Young is one. I mean,
To me.
yeah, they're there. There's a realistic 10. And so that's my hope.
Well, I think that that is a great note to close on because it is Christmas week and we can't be too gloomy. We have to have hope. And so, A.B. Stoddard, thank you so much for joining us on the Bulwark podcast. I hope you have a fantastic holiday with your family and friends. And we'll be back tomorrow and do this all over again.